Alright, actually, I was trying to fall asleep, and this kind of just hit me. Alright, I kind of had a breakthrough, I guess, in my own opinion. Dimensions, alright, I'm gonna try and tie a few things in together. First of all, I'm gonna start with a little explanation. Okay, I'm gonna start with, I guess, simple something. Okay, we have our dimension, and then there's also a dimension of time. I'm gonna explain a little bit of the dimension of time. Basically, the only reason we know the dimension of time can exist is because we are affected by it. Now, it's kind of hard to explain. I'm going to try my best, and I'm going to hope you can piece together what I'm trying to say. Basically, outside of our dimension, there's time. Now, we in ourselves are affected by it, but we in ourselves also theoretically can affect it. Now, I'll get to that later, because that's a whole different part of the plugin. If you think of the dimension of time in layers, okay? Basically, ours is in the center. Our dimension is in the center, because all dimensions somehow connect to our own. And we affect all the other dimensions in our own. I'll get to that explanation here in a bit too. But basically, thinking of it as a layer effect. Consider it like a layered circle. Our dimension is that little tiny circle right in the smack dab center. And then there's the dimension of time right outside of ours. Now, theoretically, if we could get to that dimension, we could see the spectrum of time. Not all at once, but we could see it from a point going forward. Now that's the thing, because that isn't the layer where you can enter specific points in time in a dimension. There's a layer outside of that, of which you use, it's like this. You can see the spectrum from several layers, but each layer you go out gives you a little bit more control over what part of the spectrum you see and you can enter and you can affect. Basically, the first layer, you can enter any specific time from going forward, but you can't access it from that layer. There's an access point from another layer, okay? It's like this. It's like those old little film slide things, like on cameras. They take pictures. Well, imagine it as like a stop motion on a film roll, okay? Imagine the second layer as a film roll, right? But imagine the third layer as being able to view the film roll. The second layer is pretty much like watching a movie, but you can't watch the movie unless you're seeing the film. That's the thing. The third layer, that's two outside of our own, is basically the screen. Or it's basically what you'd call the, I guess the audience's perspective of the movie. The second layer, right outside of our own, is the movie. But you can't control what part of the movie you're in. And you can't affect our own dimension from the second layer of time, or from the first layer of time. No, from the second. The first layer of time is our own. So from the second layer, you're basically at times will, but you can't actually affect our dimension either. If you could transcend into that dimension, you can basically exist on our timeline with us, but you can't affect anything or touch anything, and you're basically on one specific route, which is forward at whatever point you pop in on. So the second layer of, or the third layer of time is basically the portal. That's where you enter the first layer. That's basically the layer of the dimension that breaks down specific points of time in order for you to enter into the second dimension, which is the specific time you've chosen. But see, that's the problem. Because in order to get to the second layer, we have to backtrack through the third layer. Because you can't enter the second layer without going through the third layer. But see, that's the beauty of it. We, right now, as we're alive, are on the first layer of it. Meaning, if anyone at fucking all is going to at any point ever transcend the layers, it's going to be us. Because that's the fucking beauty of the layers of the dimensions. They all exist because of our one dimension connecting every single one of these little fuckers together. Meaning, we affect every single dimension. We just don't know fucking how yet. It's fucking amazing. Okay? It means theoretically, eventually, we may find a way to enter these dimensions from our own. But that brings problems of its own. Because as I just said, we are the core of it. Right now, here in this dimension, we affect everything. When we theoretically enter into another layer of another dimension, we lose certain abilities to do things, like affect things on this dimension. Because that's the thing about everything tying into us. We are the only common factor is our dimension. It's not other people's, it's not other dimensional layers, it's our dimension is the common ground. All of the other dimensions are only connected at our dimension. Meaning, theoretically, if you did delve into one, you may lose the ability to come back. Because all dimensions only affect our own. Other dimensions don't necessarily come into contact with other dimensions at all, except through us. Basically, we're the only common ground. And if we did go into another dimension, theoretically, we may be lost forever. It may actually have something to do with our physical bodies being the reason we're affected. Because our bodies are affected by every single dimension. It's by both time, physicality, physiologically. Our neurons affect with things in our own environment that we can't even tell exist. Our consciousness is also a part of it. And that's the thing about it. In order to truly enter another dimension, theoretically, we probably won't be able to hold onto our body. But at the same time, we probably won't be able to escape unless we find another body. And I'm not going to get into it too much, but this is kind of where the explanation of the supernatural and the possessions and stuff comes in. Because although we can't be affected too much by a lot of that shit, that's the thing. our bodies, the fact that we can actually affect things on a physical and physiological and neuronal and atomic level and spatial level, whereas something without physical form can no longer interact with all of them at the same time. That's where the supernatural may lie. Because, as we know, a lot of the supernatural things, such as ghosts and stuff, no longer have bodies. So, on some form of plane, they might be able to affect our dimension on some grounds, some form, but they can't entirely affect ours, because, like I said, only things that exist in this dimension can actually affect and be affected by every other dimension, because our dimension is the epicenter, the center point of every other dimension. The other dimensions spawn from our own and affect our own without actually affecting all of each other at the same time. Meaning, once you, I'm going to use descend in this case, from our own dimension, you lose a lot of power to affect all of the dimensions, because you're no longer connected to all of them. There's some common factor, I'm not sure what it is, but it's probably a sum. There's something that exists in our dimension that only exists in our dimension, and because of its existence, or I guess combinations of things existing in our dimension, we're the only dimension that can affect every other dimension and that can be affected by every other dimension. Sorry, I realize I'm repeating this like 1,000 times over in 1,000 different ways, but there's a lot of really bullheaded people that wouldn't understand this. What I'm saying is, we may, as far as going into other dimensions, it may be a stupid idea. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't prove the existence and shit, but there's a reason we're closer to proving other dimensions. It's because we ourselves are affected by all of those dimensions, and we can affect all of those dimensions. We may one day be able to enter all of them, but we might end up leaving our own, which means we'll be leaving the epicenter where all of the dimensions touch. We will no longer be affected by all of the dimensions, but that's not necessarily a good thing. From a scientific understanding point of view, yes, it is, but the reason why we exist in such powerful forms in our universe is so infinite in possibilities is because of all the dimensions coming together to affect everything and make infinite possibility. Should we ever leave our own dimension, we leave being affected by every other dimension all at once. And other dimensions just don't touch each other. Meaning we leave a lot of power to literally, we just leave it. Like, we completely we just walk out of range of being affected by anything that isn't touching another dimension, or that isn't touching certain dimensions in that dimension. So, yeah, it's good, but it may be bad as well. That's that.